just a few people, because hardly anyone ever does this. And I can tell you from personal experience that he was right. As a new state legislator myself, there's only been maybe 2 issues that I've heard from more than, say, 2 people on. And I promise you, when that happens, those issues get attention. So that kind of led me to 2008, 2009, which is about the time when the Tea Party movement started. And I had this, I was very idealistic, still am, but I had this notion that we could change our country using the politics as a tool. And my viewpoint has shifted some, and I'm going to explain why. But what I began to see is, or what I believed at that time was that there were enough people out there that still believed that are in the same values that our founding fathers established this nation on, that we could just, if we could just get those people involved, that we would be able to turn some things around in this country. Well, Obama was elected in 2008, first of all, and then he was reelected in 2012. And I personally found that to be very discouraging. And it caused me to take a step back and reevaluate everything that I had done over the last 4 to 5 years at that point. And I actually took a break away from politics for most all of 2013, and then came back to run for State House in 2014. God saw fit to allow me to win that race rather unexpectedly in a Republican primary, and here I am. I've been serving for a year now, going into the 2nd year of my term this next year. So, as I worked within the Tea Party movement, there were some things that you would hear often. One of those was, well, we're going to take our country back. How many of you have heard, we're going to take our country back? How many of you have heard a politician stand up and say, we're going to take our country back? And there's this idea, there's a sense of, especially among the older generations of particularly my grandparents' generation, we don't even recognize our country anymore. What is this, and what have you done with my country? And it was kind of a shocking period for me from 2008 to 2012. My eyes began to be opened for the first time at just how many problems there are with this country. We see problems in national security, and today we're seeing the rise of ISIS. We're seeing refugees coming across the border, and everyone's wondering, is that a security risk? We're wondering what's going to happen with the treaties that Obama has made, very ill-advisedly, I would say. We're wondering about, mass surveillance and the revelations that the NSA is spying on American citizens as well as on foreign governments in ways that are unconstitutional. And, and I guess that leaves me wondering, how far are we willing to go in order to preserve our safety? And is there any line we're not willing to cross? When we look at the realm of economics, this is one that particularly had me very alarmed in 2009, was, with all these bailouts that we were seeing, and we were trying to, kickstart the economy. It was almost as if the economy was dead. Its heart had stopped beating, and we were trying to restart it by dumping boatloads of cash on the economy. And some would argue, well, that worked. And some would argue, well, yeah, but what about the long-term effects of that? And so, we can't be students of history and say that you can print tons and tons of money and not pay a price for that. Basically, ends up being a backward tax on the citizenry, because your dollar, everything you own, suddenly decreases in value because there's more of it. It's just simple economic principles. We still, today, have a higher national debt than ever. We have a tax system that is far too high, that penalizes productivity. Our state government agencies are running deficits. I mean, you look at some candidates even on the presidential stage. I'm thinking of Marco Rubio here, and it's almost as if we have this attitude that, well, we're going to just spend money, we'll print it if we have to, and we don't care how we pay it back. There's no thought being given to that. When we borrow money, obviously, if that doesn't apply to you, I'm not talking to you, but I'm speaking historically. Over the decades in our country, yes, we have stopped taking personal responsibility. Parents have stopped taking personal responsibility for their children. And generation after generation after generation, there's been this assumption that, well, I turned out all right. I went through public schools, so they'll turn out all right too. But parents don't realize the state that the public schools are in. And this is, with each generation, it's been different. It's been different in a bad way, I would say. But below all that, there's this issue of parents not really knowing what's going on in the public schools. That's a deeper problem. Then there's the issue of crime, and we're noticing and we're reporting more violent crime. I don't know if we actually have more violent crime in the sense of mass shootings than there were before, but we live in an age of technology when anytime an incident like this happens, it's broadcast far and wide. But whether it's actually increasing or not, the fact is it is happening. And on top of that, there's a lot of police brutality that's happening. There's a disturbing trend toward the militarization of the police. Our founding fathers believed that there had to be a clear line of distinction between the military, which exists for national defense, and domestic law enforcement. And when you start blurring those lines, then all of a sudden you start getting we don't want our own American version of the KGB or something like that. I mean, there are things to be concerned about here. Education, there's so many issues here with academics, with Common Core, with high-stakes testing, mandatory testing, violence that happens in schools, teachings on sex, teachings on discrimination, intolerance, and so many things. And I believe that the education system has actually been a tool whereby America's values have shifted and have changed. And that's really why we're here, is to talk about what has changed in our values and what our values must be if we want to move forward as a country and to hopefully restore the form of government that our founding fathers gave us. And finally, I just want to point out, in families, there are fewer people than ever actually getting married and staying married. This is actually a trend of our day, is more and more people are just choose to live together because, well, when you think about it, I guess there's so many people that end up getting divorced. Well, why go through all that pain and monetary impact? Let's just live together like we're married, and if we get tired of that, then we can just go our separate ways. And more people are doing that. But that's come up after several generations of just no-fault divorce and this idea that, if I marry you, you're there to make me happy. And that's the wrong basis. And when our families get weak and our families crumble, then so does our society, so does our nation.
That's right.
And that's actually, many would say that's why our schools are failing, children in schools are failing, is because of lack of parental support. Many of these are in single-parent homes or in homes where, functionally speaking, there is no parent. That's why we have as much crime as we have. So these are just some of the problems, and as I began to become more aware than I ever had been of all these problems, a sense of urgency set in, even a sense of depression or even panic began to set in. Have any of you felt this? I don't think I'm alone in this. But for us to really understand what's going on here and to do something about it, we've got to understand what the right problem is. And that means we've got to look at some painful truths bang in the eye. So what I hope to do here is I hope to lead you to a mirror, to look into that mirror, to look deep into your own eyes, to look deep into your own heart, and to see what has happened and what am I willing to do about it. unless you read the whole book. So get it and read it. It's well worth it. And if you don't read books, well, they made a video version of the same thing. So you've got no excuses. He says America's two core values, almost 50 years ago now, were personal peace and affluence. So basically what we value most in America, what motivates us most, what even causes those panicked feelings to rise within ourselves, is when we see our own easy way of life threatened, or we fear losing stuff. Now, I want you to look in the mirror with me and see, is this true of me? And if it is, are you willing to change? Because if so, then you can be part of the virtue solution. If you're not willing to do that, you cannot be a part of it. And nothing we say here is going to benefit you because you're not going to be willing to do it. That's the reality that I finally confronted in 2013 was the reason we couldn't get enough people involved with the Tea Party movement was because they didn't want to be involved.
Yeah, that's right.
They weren't motivated. They were motivated for a little while when they were afraid. But fear is not a good, lasting motivator.
Amen.
Unless it's fear of the Almighty God, who's going to hold you accountable for what you do in this life. So how did we get here? How did we get to the point where America's core values are personal peace and affluence? When this country started in the 1770s, it was the laws of nature and of nature's God that our founding fathers ascribed to when they were pointing out the moral basis for leaving Great Britain. But I want to point out that the laws of nature were also what Karl Marx relied on, and what the philosophers of the late 1800s, early 1900s began to operate on. Charles Darwin says the world came into being by chance. We, as people, came into being by chance, and that began to inform our entire philosophy of life, of politics, of religion, everything, of education. But our founding fathers didn't just say the laws of nature, they said the laws of nature and of nature's God. So we're going to hear a talk on natural law today, but you've got to remember that the laws of nature are only meaningful when they're connected to the laws of nature's God. When we remember that nature had a creator, and therefore that creator does have the final say over our lives. So shortly after this country was founded, this idea of God was replaced by an impersonal abstract. It's a philosophy known as positivism. It's the idea that with our minds and with using logic and reason based on a self-evident set of assumptions, which they would call axioms, that we can reason our way to absolute truth. This was positivism. Now, there is some truth here that we can reason our way to correct conclusions when we start from the right basis and when we use logic that isn't flawed by fallacies. But the problem is that only goes so far. And we've got to remember that the reason the universe seems reasonable is because it's created by a God who is orderly and who is reasonable, right? When you take that away, then the universe suddenly, how can we be sure that what we're seeing is reality? So this positivism gave way to skepticism. Now, if you were talking over the fence to your neighbor, and your neighbor said, John, I'm just really confused. I'm not sure if I'm real or not. You'd probably give him a funny look and say, buddy, you're just thinking too hard. Go back to bed. Well, one of the issues that I've seen in our country is we don't think.
Amen. That's right.
It dawned on me the other day, the reason we don't think is because thinking is no longer meaningful. And thinking is no longer meaningful because we've become burned out, to use the phrase. We've become burned out thinking. Because, yes, that's where thinking has led us. We're not sure what's real or not. So when you're relying on your mind to lead you to truth, how can you be sure that what you see, what you feel, what your senses tell you is real, or could that be an illusion? That was the basis of the philosophy of skepticism. And you saw this played out in the arts, you saw this played out with impressionistic art, with people like Van Gogh. And, when you learn about these people and the message that they were communicating through their art fit the message. Why are we here? What is real? Can we know what is real? By saying those questions are in the realm of non-reason. That we can't figure these things out in our minds, so stop trying. Go back to bed. This philosophy was even played out in the hippie movement in the 60s as students made one final attempt to blur the lines between reason and non-reason through the use of drugs, with LSD and rock and roll music and so forth. And there were several major music festivals, Woodstock, probably at least 2 others, that all ended in ugliness. People got killed, there was violence. And so by the end of the 60s, even America's youth had given up on this idea of, well, we can just sidestep these problems through the use of drugs, which kind of became a religion for them. And, that doesn't work. So, rather than react to my parents' values of personal peace and affluence and this idea that, well, I've got to go get a college education so I can get a good job so that I can have children so that they can go to college so that they can have a good job and so on and so on. Well, they just said, just threw up their hands and said, whatever, I'm just going to have a good time. And so that put us on the path that we're on today, which is the path of apathy. I just don't care anymore. There's a humorous song that I want to read the words to you. I'm not going to attempt to sing it. I'll spare you that. You may have heard it if you like the TV show Monk. That show, you'll hear the song at the beginning of the show. But this captures this idea of apathy that we look around and we see in people. The words go like this: it's a jungle out there, disorder and confusion everywhere. No one seems to care. Well, I do. Hey, who's in charge here? It's a jungle out there, poison in the very air we breathe. Do you know what's in the water that you drink? Well, I do. It's amazing. People think I'm crazy because I worry all the time. If you paid attention, you'd be worried too. You better pay attention, or this world we love so much just might kill you. I could be wrong now, but I don't think so, because it's a jungle out there. It's a jungle out there. Well, it is, and yes, there are a lot of problems with our country. But we don't have to feel depressed, okay? I struggled with this for a while, yes, I'll admit it. But what turned things around for me was, I thought about the Bible verse and Psalms. It says, if the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? This is asked as a rhetorical question. The obvious answer that the asker is implying is there's nothing you can do. What can we do about our country? Nothing. These are problems that are far too big for us. And yes, they are far too big for us alone. But then I realized the fallacy in the question. And the question implies that the foundations have been destroyed. The reality is the foundations have not been destroyed. We have abandoned them. So no longer are we building our society and building our laws on the idea of the laws of nature and nature's God, and the idea that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Now we're building on the foundation we came into being by chance. And so all that matters is what's socially expedient, what's socially helpful. And what is socially helpful is going to be different based on who you ask. If you ask one person, they're going to say one thing. You ask another person, they're going to say another thing. Even if it's a majority rules doctrine, well, the majority changes its mind all the time. So this is the society that we have today. Do we have the ability to change it? Well, that's why I'm leading you to this mirror to look into your own heart to see, are you subscribing personally to these ideas? Are you involved for the sake of your children? Is that even a big enough goal to get you up off the couch, to make even life changes if needed? Or is there something greater that we must live for if we would practice virtue? So I want to just tell you this, and you need to see this, and you need to own this. This is your country. And we have made it this way. So when you look around and you get up in the morning and you wonder, well, where's my country and what's happened to it? Well, this is the country you created, and you need the first step towards getting back to virtue and restoring our country to its once greatness is to take ownership of the fact that we are responsible for our own problems. We can't blame a school system for dumbing us down. I did that too. I've complained that people don't think anymore, and it's as if there's this impersonal machine out there that by no fault of anyone, just by virtue of the fact that we have a dysfunctional school system, that people don't learn how to think anymore. Well, as I said before, I don't think it's an impersonal machine. I think it's a philosophy that is very personal.
Right.
That we have stopped thinking because it's no longer meaningful to think. Because we have thought that by thinking we could arrive at truth, whereas instead, by thinking, we're to acknowledge our Creator. And when we do that, suddenly everything makes sense. We live in a world that's reasonable, that's rational, that's understandable. There are limits on what we can do as individuals. There are limits on what government can do. And there's an absolute standard, there's an absolute foundation that we can build our lives and our society on. And things work so much better that way. So we can't blame the liberals. There's so much talk, liberals versus conservative nowadays. And you're either on the right side or you're on the wrong side, depending on which of these you're on. And, each person's finger is pointing back at the other person. Well, we need to take those fingers and turn them around and point them at ourselves. It's not the liberals that are at fault here. It's us who have subscribed to liberal ideas without even recognizing that, without even acknowledging that. That's what we're doing. We can't blame the evil corporations. There's a lot of this is more of a liberal issue. You hear people rail about the influence of money in politics and the fact that huge corporations can practically sway an election or buy an election. Well, that's not entirely true. There are other factors, but there is a lot of money that goes into politics, and if you think that's the cause of our problems, well, you're just wrong. I'm sorry. That's not it. That is a problem, but you've got to ask the why behind each of these things to get at what the real problem is. What is the problem with our values? And you can't blame the New World Order. Well, the New World Order, such as it exists, is there opportunistically. And so if it's taking over, it's because we're letting them. Why are we letting them? We can't blame the refugees or the illegal immigrants. We can't say, well, illegal immigrants are coming over here and taking all our jobs, so we can't get jobs. Or you can't say that refugees are coming over and they're a national security threat. Well, why? You've got to ask the why behind all these questions. Why is this an issue? And the issue is, underneath all this, that what we value most in life in America is our easy way of life and our ability to get and keep stuff. We can't even blame the pastors. I've been guilty of this one too. I've said, America's in the country that we're in because pastors have no longer stood up for what's right. And pastors have, and a lot of people, when they say this, what they're really saying is, well, America's in the condition that we're in because pastors aren't telling us who to vote for, and pastors aren't getting involved in political issues. And there's a place for all that, I'll admit, there is. And I would love to see more pastors be more aware, first of all, of what's going on, and more involved. How can you be a good shepherd to your people if you don't even know what the dangers are out there? However, pastors can only point you in the right direction. They can't make you go there. And so we can't blame our pastors for our country's condition. We can only blame ourselves. A French philosopher, Joseph I'm probably going to mangle this name, but Maitar, in 1811 said, every nation gets the government it deserves. This is true, and this has been true for many, many years. Alexis de Tocqueville came over here and got familiar with American culture, wrote a book about it, and he's the one that sort of coined this idea of American exceptionalism. He said America is exceptional because of geographically where it was started, the time in history when it was started, the kind kind of people it was started by, the kind of values it was started on. Today, what is exceptional about our country? What is exceptional is our vices, not our virtues. It's our national debt that's exceptional.
That's right.
It's no longer a virtue. It's no longer our core values. So we've got to stop looking for a champion. One of the things that I began to notice over the last year and a half in particular is just our seeming obsession with finding someone who will fix everything for us. This obsession with the presidential races, I think you see this more clearly than anywhere else. And the depression people feel when there seems to be no good candidate, or when the wrong guy is ahead. You know, it's like this massive football game that our entire country is watching, and we play politics, and we enjoy the theater that we're given. And we fail to recognize that this president is one man, and he can only do what Congress will allow him to do, unless you're Obama. But then again, what's the problem with that? The problem is that Congress is letting him do things that are against the Constitution. Well, why are they letting him do things that are against the Constitution? Because we no longer have any spine. Because all we care about is an easy life and having stuff. Until that changes, nothing's going to change in this country. We got to admit this. We got to own this. A politician that is elected by people who are seeking personal peace and affluence, who subscribes to the values of personal peace and affluence himself, and who gets elected by promising more personal peace and affluence, is not going to change a thing in this country. Now, you know, there are some conservative candidates on the stage. There are men like Ted Cruz, and his slogan is "Reignite the Promise of America." Well, that sounds wonderful. Reignite the promise of America. But how do you plan to do that? Do you plan to do that, like he recently said, it's real simple. We're going to kill the terrorists, we're going to repeal Obamacare, we're going to defend the Constitution, every word of it. Well, that's great. Those things need to happen. But is that going to really fix the problems with America when the problems exist in our own hearts? When the problems are fundamental to our country?
That's right.
How is a presidential policy going to change this? And that's even beside the point of, can he even get those things done if elected? Because, as I mentioned, he is one man. I want to talk for a minute to the Christians in the room. Many of you probably are, or would say that you are Christians. It starts with us. If we're not willing to identify and recognize and eliminate the idols in our own life, the wrong philosophies, the wrong values in our own hearts, and set those aside and turn back to God, then who will in our country? Who will? Israel was saved by champions like Samson, like Gideon, as I alluded to earlier. But the thing you got to understand is, even when God does choose to deliver a people by a champion, it's because he knows that people is ready to turn back to him.
Amen.
And either that's already happening, or he chooses to allow the events that unfold to be the spark that provokes that. It can work either way, but the problem is we can't think that we deserve to have someone to come in and save us. And we can't look for that person. We've got to look first in our own hearts. And if God chooses to send a great president, or a great senator, or a great governor, or someone, you know, that does a lot of stuff and it's dramatic and it's neat and it's fun, well, to God be the glory for that, not to us. But that's not going to happen unless we're willing to change ourselves. And the condition of our own hearts is also the reason why we don't see more people running good people running for office. The reason you don't see good politicians getting elected is because there aren't good politicians running. And the reason there aren't good politicians running is because there aren't good politicians. And the reason there aren't good politicians is because there aren't good people. We got to deal with this. We got to deal with it first in our own hearts. We've got to lead our children, point our children in the right direction. It's their choice. They have to own it too. We can't make them do that. supreme authority for your life, your family, your society, and your country. And until we do that, nothing's actually going to change. The question is, who decides? Who decides what law is? Who decides what is good and right? Who decides what virtue is? Virtue is a word, and we can put whatever meaning we want to behind that word. So, for this to work, we've got to be honest about what it is, about the fact that we live in a world that is created by God. And, God's gift of freedom to man is not for the sake of self-actualization. It's not so that we can be the best people we can possibly be. It's not so that we can pursue the American dream, but it's for the sake of doing